Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The city of Valmir was alive with shadows, and Caton moved among them like a ghost. The streets below teemed with life, merchants shouting their wares, nobles parading in gilded carriages, beggars huddled in alleyways, but Cain noticed none of it. High above the chaos, he was little more than a flicker of darkness, darting across rooftops with the agility of a panther, every step silent, every breath controlled. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, Shadow Sal, a weapon of legend and curse. The blade hummed faintly in his mind, whispering promises of power, urging him forward. Kelsensai's latest mission was his most dangerous yet, to assassinate Emperor Eric, the ruler of the empire. The Black Hand had been clear in their orders. The emperor had grown corrupt, they claimed. His death was necessary for the stability of the empire. Kaysen had learned long ago not to question the motives of his employer. His only job was to kill. He was good at it, too good, perhaps. But he had never let that bother him before. The shadows were his world, and in them he was king. The palace loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of stone and glass, guarded by an army of soldiers. But Caton had no intention of using the front door. He slipped into the courtyard, blending into the darkness as easily as a fish glides through water. His breathing slowed, his heartbeat steady, the sword at his side seemed to pulse with anticipation, feeding off his adrenaline. It had always been that way with Shadow Soul. The sword was more than a weapon. It was alive in a sense, and it thrived on death. Kessing climbed the outer wall, his fingers finding purchase on the rough stone. He moved swiftly, his body honed to perfection through years of training and countless missions. He was no ordinary assassin. He had been handpicked by the Black Hand, trained from childhood to be the ultimate weapon. But even among the assassins, Caton was special. Shadow Soul had chosen him. It had whispered to him in the darkness, offered him its power, and he had accepted without hesitation. There had been a price, of course. There always was. The Emperor Sarah private chambers were at the top of the highest tower. Kayan reached the window without difficulty, slipping inside like a breath of wind. The room was dark, but his eyes adjusted quickly. The Emperor was seated at a desk, his back to the window, unaware of the danger lurking behind him. Keithensane's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword. This was the moment. One swift strike, and the Emperor would be dead. The mission would be complete, but something stopped him. The Emperor's voice broke the silence, soft but firm. "You're not the first assassin they've sent." Kynan froze, the blade halfway drawn from its sheath. How had the Emperor known? He hadn't made a sound. No one could have detected his presence, not with Shadow Soul masking him. The Emperor turned slowly, his face shadowed by the flickering light of a nearby candle. He was older than Caton had expected, with deep lines etched into his face and eyes that held the weight of countless burdens. There was no fear in those eyes, only a tired resignation. "They told you I am corrupt, didn't he?" The Emperor said, his voice barely a whisper, "that my death would save the Empire." Caton said nothing. He was not here to exchange words. His fingers twitched on the hilt of his sword, but for the first time in his life, he hesitated. The Emperor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You don't even know the truth, do you? You were just a pawn, like all the others." Canaan's eyes narrowed. He had been trained to block out distractions, to focus solely on the mission. But something about the Emperor Sad's words gnawed at him like a splinter lodged deep in his mind. "They valed to you," the Emperor continued. "The Black Hand, the ones who sent you, they don't care about the Empire. They only want control. You think you were killing a tyrant, but you were just doing their dirty work." Kayan's grip on the sword tightened. He had heard enough. He would end this now. He drew the blade fully, and the room seemed to grow darker, as if the shadows themselves recoiled from the sword's presence. But the Emperor did not flinch. He met Caden's gaze, his eyes steady. "That sword," he said, nodding toward Shadow Soul, "do you even know what it is?" Kanan's jaw clenched. He knew the sword was ancient, powerful, forged in the darkest of magic. But its origins had never mattered to him. It was a tool, nothing more. The Emperor smiled faintly, as if reading Caden's thoughts. "It's not just a weapon. It's a curse. It was made by the same people who trained you. The Black Hand created it to control men like you. Every time you kill with it, the sword tightens its grip on you. You will have no will of your own. You will all be nothing but a puppet. Caden's heart raced. He had always felt a strange connection to the sword, a pull he couldn't see quite explain. But he had dismissed it as part of the weapon subject. Now doubts began to creep into his mind. Was the sword controlling him? Was he nothing more than a tool in someone else's management? You have to believe me, the Emperor said, his voice soft but insistent. But before you strike, ask yourself this: who benefits from my death, the people or the ones who sent you? Khan hesitated, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thought. He had never questioned a mission before. He had always followed orders, trusting that the Black Hands knew what was best. But now, standing in the Emperor's chamber, the weight of the truth pressed down on him. He could feel the sword's presence in his mind, urging him to finish the job. It whispered promises of power, of fulfillment. But beneath those whispers, there was something darker, something that made Caden's skin crawl. The Emperor rose from his chair, slowly, carefully, as if he knew how fragile this moment was. You have a choice, Caden. You can kill me and continue to serve those who use you, or you can walk away. You can break free. Caden said, hand trembled on the hilt of the sword. His instincts screamed at him to finish the job, to plunge the blade into the Emperor's heart, and end this, but something held him back. The Emperor's eyes bore into his, filled with a quiet strength. You are not just a weapon, you are a man. You can choose your own path. Caden's breath came in ragged gasps. The sword in his hand pulsed with dark energy, urging him to strike, to kill. But for the first time in his life, Caden resisted. He took a step back. The Emperor's expression softened, and for a moment, Caden saw something in his eyes that he had not expected. Compassion. I want to stop you if you choose to kill me, the Emperor said quietly, but know this: if you do, you will never be free. Caden's mind raced. Could it be true? Could he really break free from the Black Hand? Could he reclaim his life, his will? The sword's whispers grew louder, more insistent, but Caden silenced them with a single thought. He sheathed the blade. The Emperor let out a slow breath, relief washing over his features. You've made the right choice. Caden didn't he respond. He turned on his heel and walked toward the window, his mind still spinning. He had never walked away from a mission before, but something had changed in him, something fundamental. He wasn't sure what his next move would be, but he knew one thing for certain. He would no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. As he climbed out the window and disappeared into the night, Caden felt the weight of the sword at his side. Shadow Soul was still with him, still whispering, still watching. But for the first time, Caden felt in control. Caden moved through the shadows of Valmir's streets, the city's noise a distant hum, his mind a storm of questions. The weight of Shadow Soul hung heavy at his side, though the sword, as to whispers, had grown quieter now. It no longer urged him to kill, but the presence lingered, like a snake coiled in the darkness, waiting for its next move. He had turned away from the Emperor's assassination. He had walked away from the Black Hand's orders, something he never thought possible. The notion should have made him feel free, but instead, it filled him with a strange unease. What was freedom when you had lived your whole life in the grip of shadow? Caden wasn't sure he knew anymore. But one thing was certain. The Black Hand wouldn't let this betrayal go unpunished. As Caden weaved through the city, his keen instincts told him he was being followed. He had expected it. The Black Hand didn't leave loose ends, especially not ones like him. He slipped into a narrow alley, pausing in the deep gloom to listen. The soft scrape of footsteps echoed faintly, deliberate, careful, but not careful enough. Caden drifted to the hilt of his sword, but he didn't draw it. A figure emerged at the mouth of the alley, dressed in the familiar dark garb of the Black Hand's assassin. Caden had worked alongside this man before. Knew his face, though. The name escaped him. The assassin's hood was drawn low over his eyes, his expression unreadable, but Caden could feel the tension in the air. Caden, the assassin said, his voice a low rasp, you should be known better than to defy them. Caden's grip tightened on the sword, though he kept it sheathed. I am done being their pawn. The assassin stepped forward, his hand resting on his own blade. It's all not that simple. You know the rules. No one walks away from the Black Hand. Caden's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained calm. Maybe it sometimes someone did. The assassin hesitated for a moment, and in that brief pause, Caden saw a flicker of doubt in the man inside. They all knew the cost of betrayal. They had been trained to believe it was impossible, that the Black Hand controlled everything. But Cain had seen the truth. He wasn't just a weapon. He wasn't just an extension of the sword at his side. I don't want to fight you, Caton said, his voice soft, almost pleading. There's another way. But the assassin's hesitation was brief, and his eyes hardened. There is no other way. In a blur of movement, the assassin drew his blade and lunged. Cain reacted on instinct, Shadow's soul sliding from its teeth with a hit. The shadows around him seemed to deepen, swirling as the sword, its power flared to light. Their blades clashed with a sharp ring of steel, sparks flying in the narrow alley. The assassin was fast, his strikes precise, but Cain was faster. The magic of the sword coursed through him, guiding his movements as he dodged and parried. Each clash of blades sent a shiver down Cain's spine. The sword set power pushing him to strike, to end the fight. But Cain resisted. He didn't want to kill anymore. Not for the Black Hand. Not for anyone. Stop, Cain growled between gritted teeth, knocking the assassin's blade aside. You don't have to do this? But the assassin was relentless, his eyes cold, his attacks unyielding. Cain could see it in the man's face, the same blind loyalty, the same unthinking obedience that had once ruled Karen's life. There was no reasoning with him. The Black Hand's grip was too tight. With a swift, brutal move, Cain disarmed the assassin, sending his sword clattering to the ground. The man stumbled back, but before he could recover, Cain closed the distance, pressing the tip of Shadow's soul to the man's throat. Walk away, Captain said, his voice low and dangerous. Tell them I am dead. Disappear. You can still have your life. The assassin's chest heaved with heavy breaths, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, Kessin thought he might listen, might take the chance Kessin was offering. But then the assassin's set hand moved toward a hidden dagger at his waist, his face twisting with defiance. Caden's heart sank. There was no choice. In one smooth motion, Kessin plunged down. The sword drank deeply, the shadows around them thickening as the man's life drained away. Caden stood still, staring down at the body, the weight of the kill settling heavily on his shoulder. He had tried to show mercy, but mercy had no place in the world of shadow. Cannon wiped the blood from the blade and sheathed it, the whispers of the sword, now soft and satisfying. The shadows in the alley seemed to retreat, the magic fading as quickly as it had come. I looked down at the dead man's solemn face, his expression one of peace and death, as if the release had freed him from something deeper. Caden turned away, forcing himself to move. He couldn't stay in Valmir. The Black Hand would send others. They would never stop hunting him. Not as long as he lived. He had chosen this path, but it was not one that came without consequences. He needed to disappear, just like the Emperor had told him. He needed to break free for real this time. As he made his way out of the city, couldn't he shake the feeling that the sword was watching him.
Waiting.
He'd won the battle today, but the war against Shadow's soul was far from over. It had tasted blood again, and the pull was stronger now, more insistent. The sword craved death, and it wouldn't be satisfied with small kills forever. Days passed as Katzen traveled far from Valmir, through forests and over mountains, avoiding towns and people as much as possible. He had always been a lone wolf, but now, more than ever, he needed isolation. The sword's whispers grew louder with each passing day, its hunger gnawing at the edges of his mind. He fought to keep control, but the longer he went without using its power, the harder it became to resist. One night, as he sat by a small fire in the wilderness, Caden thought about the Emperor's word. There was a way to break free from the sword's holds. The Emperor had hinted at it, though he hadn't provided detail. There had to be something, some ancient magic, some lost knowledge that could sever the bond between Cain and Shadow's soul. Cain stared into the flames, his mind drifting to memories of his past. He had never questioned the Black Hand before. He had always been loyal, always followed orders, without hesitation. But now, those memories felt distant, like someone else. Like he had been a weapon, but now he wanted to be more. He wanted to be free. As the fire crackled softly, Caden made a decision. He would find a way to break the curse of Shadow's soul, no matter the cost. He would fight for his own future, not one dictated by shadows and death. He rose to his feet, the sword heavy at his side, and began walking again, the firelight fading behind him. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Cain felt something he hadn't. He felt, in a long time, hope. And for the first time in his life, Caden was not running toward death. He was running towards something far more elusive: freedom.